Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great honour to welcome 5 people up on stage, and one of my visions for Maximum Occupancy is to represent the whole accommodation industry, and I think I've got them all the representation. I'd like to welcome on stage Sean Jenner, the CEO of Big Four Holiday Parks, Rod Munro, the Managing Director, Australasia BWH Hotels, a great friend of mine, Gavin, Chairman and President of Swiss-Belhotel International, Will Creedon, founder and CEO of Alloggio on the short-term letting market and a great client of ours, and Matthew Cameron Smith, CEO of Voyages, Indigenous Tourism Australia. Please welcome them on stage. Thank you. All right, what a panel. Probably representing every part of the accommodation industry. Okay, let's start off, Will. And I'll ask this question to everyone. How do you see the state of the market where you are operating in currently and challenges it's facing and opportunities? Because you're in a very different market to everyone else.
Good morning,
Tell
everybody.
me about Alloggio, by the way, because a lot of people haven't heard about it. I hear it about every day.
All right. Alloggio is Italian for accommodation. I'm an Irishman, obviously fond of things that share. And Alloggio was born on the 21st of December 2015, where we took a budget hotel, commercially leased it, added some smarts, and today we've got 14 motels and hotels, leisure parks, and then we've got 3,500 holiday homes scattered across Australia and New Zealand that we manage under a corporate real estate license on behalf of mum and dad owners. Biggest supplier of inventory to Booking.com and Expedia, as well as Airbnb in that subsector of accommodation. We have a few goals and a few stones to kick, so that's Alloggio in a sort of a short 90-second breath. During our journey, my wife and I, Karen, took it to the Australian Stock Exchange as the first listed entity in this market to ever list on the exchange from the short-term letting industry. Markets, as we all know, have been difficult over the last 75 to 85 weeks. And we privatised it again last year. So we're on a belt of an opportunity. Listening to the guys that are up here a while ago, there's great opportunity provided you're focused and careful and considered in watching what the next sort of 600 to 800 weeks looks like. So that's what keeps me up, keeps me opportunity. Just drive on.
Okay. Rod, very different model as well than BWH Hotels.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Thanks, mate. I guess looking at those STR numbers, probably a little bit relieved to see the regional spaces are probably realistic to where our forecasts are and where our group sits, where 80% of our assets are sitting in that regional space. And then obviously we have the Brisbanes and the Melbournes and the Sydneys covered as well. But I think that's probably where the challenges lie for us in those regional areas. And I know we're going to talk a little bit further about that later, but I think that's where we sit, BWH. Yep. In that space with our Best Western brands and our Shore Stay brands. And of course, we also work in luxury with World Hotels. We haven't seen a lot of movement in that space in this part of the world, but certainly in Asia and other Europe and US, we've seen movement in those areas. But yeah.
Gavin, you got a lot of, you're growing exponentially. I've watched you grow for a long time.
We're still very small. We're still very small. I'm from Swiss-Belhotel International. We have 135 hotels in 20 countries. 20 years ago, we had 3 hotels in 1 country. We're seeing Asia as a machine of tourism, and it's really growing. We're also moving into Africa, which is interesting, and that's barring a few riots. That's interesting. I've got a private equity company now involved with me, which is also interesting. That keeps me awake at night. And we reckon the next 18 months, thanks to private equity, we'll probably double up to 200, 250 hotels. So it could be some business for you.
Hopefully, not at $2. That's right.
Okay.
Sean, holiday parks just booming, still booming. Where do you see yourself as a market and the opportunities there?
Yeah, so we're Big Four Holiday Parks. We have about 140 branded parks across Australia and a further 130 or so available to book on big4.com.au. We've been a huge beneficiary of the tailwind in regional travel over the last 3 years coming out of COVID. And I think there's still plenty of optimism there. I think, as per some of the data shared today, it's certainly much more modest than it has been. Our big opportunity, I think, is how do we capitalise on the new customers that have come into the category. We had, I guess, a captive market for a couple of years, through COVID, and now as choice opens back up to those customers, it's how do we protect and retain that. I think there are 100,000 more caravans on the road than there were pre-COVID.
Really? 100,000?
Yeah, about 100,000. So,
Wow.
So our job's to make sure they're sitting in holiday parks, not in driveways, first and foremost. Equally, though, I think we're also a sector that has a huge diversity of product. We've got extremely premium, high-end accommodation at some end of our parks, but we're also still an incredibly strong value entry for customers as well. So as a category, we generally do well in tougher times as well, and are quite resilient. So certainly I think, not as bullish as we have been, but I think still plenty of room for optimism and growth in the next few years.
Yep. Matt, love always having you up on stage. Welcome back. You operate in a very different part of the world, and I think, regional tourism is such a huge opportunity, and indeed from Tourism Australia said yesterday that is the driving force, that's the engine. Where do you see the challenges and opportunity in regional tourism, and tell me about what you're doing?
I think the earlier panel mentioned the importance of regional tourism, and for us it's been about aviation and restoring, the right capacity in terms of aviation.
Yep.
It's been much maligned, much talked about in terms of international, and it's important. It's been reported that aviation in Australia domestically is at pre-COVID levels. However, it's a very different looking aviation environment. We relied on 43 flights per week prior to the pandemic. We're at 31 now. That only just increased in June with Virgin's return. It's a 2-year negotiation to get the carriers back. It's a very considered decision.
Yep.
In terms of route development. The state-based aviation attraction funds were arguably probably the worst thing to ever happen to our industry. Very important that money's released to encourage routes back. However, it changes the behaviour of the carriers to only respond when there's money on the table, and that makes it a bit harder. However, for us, right now, it's a bit of a purple patch in terms of aviation, because Virgin added 62,000 seats a year with their return ex-Brisbane and Melbourne. But for 8 months of last year, we had no access at all from South East Queensland, which was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Talking about the aviation market, that's really the pipeline into Australia for everyone, in and out. Do you think the government's doing enough with the aviation industry to attract, one, for airfares to come down, second, to attract more international carriers? Because really, that's the lifeblood of it, and airfares are coming down within Australia. Talking to Gavin before, not so much in New Zealand, and New Zealand is suffering as a result. But do you think the government's doing enough with the aviation industry to attract the international carriers to come in, or the international carriers are saying, bugger Australia, we're looking at overseas? Who wants to answer that?
We don't have enough time for that one, but I think governments have got several levers at their disposal: regulation, taxation, and funding. Whether the federal government should get into funding aviation is a complex one because of dispersal and who gets the benefit from those passengers coming in. But I do think there's a role to play in terms of regulation or deregulation to make it easier for foreign carriers to grow.
Yeah.
A healthy Qantas is better than the alternative, so it is important that we have a healthy national carrier, but we need competition. That's the only way that gets prices down.
Yeah. Anyone else talk about the aviation, or don't want to touch it? That's all right. Okay. Talk about, the hotel and accommodation industry relies on people. Let's talk about the crisis that is facing the industry, which is staffing. How do you plan to attract quality professionals back, or new people to the industry in the longer term? Because it's everywhere, in every sector of the accommodation industry and the food and beverage. There is a shortage of good staff. Who wants to sort of answer that? How do you do it at your level? Gavin, how do you?
It's a tough one, especially in Australia and New Zealand. It's getting people to want to go back to the hotel industry. Africa, it's easy. Middle East, it's easy. Asia, it's easy. But it's just nobody wants to work outside the hours of 9 to 5, or probably 10 till 2, most of them. And of course, the payroll's gone crazy. So payroll's gone up 20%. Productivity's gone down 25%. So we have a real We have a real problem on our hands.
Yeah, and I think that's globally. I mean, yesterday we had Shazine Contractor and her journey from being front office now to the COO of Trilogy, and what she's done. You know, I think the government's not doing enough to attract people. That hospitality is a career. You have to start somewhere, and the opportunities to it, because Australia's such a beautiful country. So, Rod, do you want to say something?
Yeah, look, I think what you're saying, you know, that flexibility is in our industry as well. You know, a lot of our teams do want that flexibility in operations, and it's sometimes a challenge. Head office staff, it's okay. Maybe some of the admin roles, it's okay. But I guess having that bit of flexibility in your work and how many days you work in the office and how many days you might do at home is something that we have a challenge in hospitality. But I think attracting people with a defined path to management is something that we need to look at as companies. And I know with my group that's exactly what we're trying to do, is work out, okay, if we can attract some of these work experience people, the school kids that are coming in, doing work experience with us, and really define a career path for them.
Start somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, I think it needs to start there, mate. I think I've got a daughter who's 14 and she's at high school. She hasn't heard anything about hospitality yet. I know she's interested. So I keep sort of thinking, well, hopefully soon we'll start to sort of click into that mode as well and have the school kids really influenced at that level.
Yeah. Will?
We're just going through an evolution. 100% there's productivity issues, and 100% there is a serious change in cost management. But when you look at it through, when you take the wide spectrum of what hospitality is, regardless if it's property management, maintenance management task, regardless if it's marketing, revenue, back-end or front-end coding, regardless if it's just simply saying hello to a guest in a language and in a way that suits them. I think we need to appreciate your comment about government, but government only responds if we ask in a clever and a clear and a precise way. And if we were to be clear about the silos, and I'm going to use the word silos because it's actually disciplines, and there's probably about 18 different disciplines across our hospitality sphere, and we actually didn't decide how we actually create succession and opportunity inside those disciplines, I think we'd start to go a long way to getting partners to help us solve the problem, as well as actually trying to figure out a way of commercializing and monetizing those disciplines in a different way to ensure that we can attract and sustain people at a level of wage and opportunity that is going to be here over the next 500 or 1,000 weeks. So we need to actually figure out what we're going to do first, to be honest with you, to deal with this. I won't say crisis, I actually think it's a great opportunity. Like some of the levers, and Matt rightly said around aviation, tax, etc., but we can actually do the same thing in recruitment and retention of our teams. But we also need to look across the world about creating corridors and opportunities for those corridors for those people to work here or stay where they are in those countries and utilise their great skills. So there's many different ways across the disciplines that we should be open to, is my view. Yeah. Take it as an opportunity to resculpture.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, I think Will's absolutely right. There's levers the government can pull, and right now as an industry we need to band together because there is bipartisan support, albeit unofficial, to cap skilled migration. The desire there on behalf of government is to cap skilled migration to try and resolve the housing crisis, but you don't solve a crisis by creating another one. This morning in the press they're reporting food and beverage establishments are failing up to 11%, up from 6% 2 years ago. A combination of margin compression but also skills and labour. And the government can help in terms of ensuring our industry remains open to skilled migration, but also pathway to permanent residency for visa workers, because there's no point fixing attraction if you haven't fixed retention. It's just a snake that eats itself.
Because tourism is probably the third or fourth largest industry in Australia. And I just think the government's not doing enough really to attract that. Sean, do you want to add anything from the holiday park? Because your model's very different.
Yeah, very different model given how our parks are all independently owned and very regionally based. But I think a lot of our more successful parks are really working hard to make sure they're an employer of choice and not just an employer. I think there's been periods over the last couple of years where it has been anyone who's a warm body and will show up for a shift, they will hire, and I think it's balancing out a little bit now. But I think parks have worked probably harder than ever to really, I guess, think about their own employee value proposition, the culture they're creating, and how do they create, you know, positive word of mouth within local communities around being a place that people want to work.
Yeah. I mean, if we paid more, do you reckon we could recruit more? If we paid in the industry? Gavin?
I don't think paying more is necessarily the answer. The more I seem to pay, the less I seem to get. But that's probably another issue. Well, we have to look at people's careers. COVID just took people out of the industry. We have to realise, the government's got to realise that the hospitality industry, which is everything about hospitality, is the only industry of employment left in the world. And so if people want jobs, they're going to have to get in. The biggest thing is attitude. The biggest thing is wanting to talk to people. You know, they should use their phones instead of looking at their phones.
Yeah.
And you know, it's, I'm involved in education also, and they banned mobile phones for secondary school, and marks went up 25% instantly. It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm also a dairy farmer, so I've got 1,500 cows. I only have 5 people working for me now.
Through automation, or
through automation, and employing Filipinos, and also by subcontracting.
Yeah. You
know, outsourcing. So all the big contracting work is done by professional people who are specialised in the business.
Yeah.
And this is what hospitality must do.
Yeah. Let's talk about diversity and inclusion, because there's a shortage of staff. I mean, it seems to be a hot topic in Australia, with many articles and businesses pages dedicated to this. What's the accommodation industry doing to encourage diversity at senior management levels? I mean, we've got a HR panel. We've got Andrea from Hotel Edico, who employs people with disabilities, and the Indigenous as well. I mean, what are hotels doing to encourage diversity at senior management levels? Who wants to answer that? Gavin?
I'm looking for promotion myself. You have to want to
retirement.
You have to want to be promoted. You have to want to go after the future. You know, all my life, every time my boss went on leave, I worked 10 times as hard, and I worked 2 or 3 times. His job wasn't there when he got back. So it's really we try and encourage, but it's also a problem about people wanting to take responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It's not easy. Employment is my biggest challenge, especially at a very senior level. But you know, I employed a very senior guy 2 weeks ago, and I gave him his contract on Saturday morning. I said, "You got 24 hours." He came back Sunday morning and he signed it, no questions asked. And Monday morning I said, "Well, okay, you're going to get on a plane and travel with me for the next 2 weeks." He said, "No problem." Then that's the sort of attitude we need, going that extra mile and be hungry for promotion.
Yeah, definitely.
I think when it comes to diversity in a workforce, it's important that the organisation sets themselves with the right purpose and the right goals, and holds themselves accountable to it.
Yeah.
It's got to be transparent. It's got to be there for all to see. If we talk about Indigenous employment, for us, it's a very important part of our purpose and our business. And one example would be cultural leave is very important. Sorry business or family business is very important. So we've got a policy in place where our Indigenous team members can opt to take 90% of their salary, bank 10%. So when they do go on cultural leave, there's still an income there. So it's about being flexible and just ensuring, I think we've all talked about it, our industry's got to make sure it's a career, not a job. So what are the pathways, and make sure the pathways are clear.
Yeah. Will?
Look, just simply combination of the 2 guys. It's merit. Doesn't matter if it's he, she, them. Age doesn't matter. Colour doesn't matter. It's actually what's inside them. Do they actually want to do it?
Yeah.
And actually, will they want to fit in? Because it's a team sport. It's not a single sport. And provided that is there, then it comes down to the fish rots from the head down, and that is accountability. They need to perform just like we need to perform, and those that perform and create the environment and the culture of that, those behaviours, then there should be no stopping that person or persons heading towards C-suite and others.
Yeah, okay, all right. Talk about sustainability. Hotels have often led the way in the area of environmental initiatives. How are you letting people know about these initiatives and the positive impact they're having on sustainability?
I think from my side, carefully is probably the best way to let people know about it as well. And I think one of the challenges is there's, so much great work happening across all of our parks and, the industry as well. But equally, there's so much still to do as well. And I think, rightfully people and brands are getting challenged on things like greenwashing and, focusing on the things they're doing well versus the things they can do. So I think it is important to talk and share through content channels, marketing, all those sorts of things. But I think also doing it in a sensitive way and not pretending to be further along the journey than we are.
Yep. Rod.
Adrian, mate, you've got to be current, right, with your environmental policies and your sustainability, and I think that's. I know we're just going through a major shift at the moment where we're updating all our certifications and we're implementing all the new ideas, and we've got to be current. We've got to make sure that it's included in all our RFPs for all our business, because that, a lot of the corporate companies that book with us as an industry definitely want sustainability included in that, and that's the corporate business, and of course then the leisure similar. They're really looking to stay in hotels that have got those sort of initiatives in place. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else on sustainability or what benefits? I mean, the initiatives bring to the hotel, Gavin.
Are people going to pay for it?
No.
So that's your first answer and your first problem. We all try and do our best. As I said, I'm in agriculture, I do greenwashing, I recycle everything, I put everything back onto the land, so I'm doing as much as I can, but we need to have more technical development. I was just, 2 days ago, I was in Malaysia looking at an amazing resort development, and I saw these swimming pools with stirrers in them, and I'm sitting right on the coastline. I said to the guys, what's that? They said, it's our STP, of course, sewage treatment plant. And they're just stirring away and bubbling away. And I said, where does it go? They said, into the sea. So I see in Indonesia, I see in Malaysia, I see in Thailand, I see in Vietnam, huge problems. And if we don't take a global approach, if the richer nations are not going to help the poorer nations, saving a few plastic bottles is not going to achieve much. So it's actually a global problem.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else on sustainability? Well, let's talk a little bit about the industry you're operating on and the challenges you're having with the government and laws and everything. You're very active in that area, very vocal. Tell me a little bit about that and why the government's like, ugh.
Look, I suppose, as Matt was saying earlier on, but governments, God bless them, they're made up of humans that go to work for 32 hours a week, and it's very difficult for them to consume the amount of information on particular topics and education spheres, and in particular in short-term rental, it's an industry that's been around 140 odd years. Circa we occupy, give or take, 1% of 11 million homes across Australia, and about 40% of what we do is actually enabling governments and private enterprise to make sure that mum and dad are looked after in hospitals, the bridges are built, etc., etc. But they forget about all of that, and they forget about actually the fact that that 140 years has been instrumental in rural and regional and metro development and fabric of communities.
Yeah.
So what's been happening over the last sort of 75 to 150 weeks is there's been a very easy enemy or dartboard, bullseye, from the housing crisis to force attention from the less mature politician, advisor, bureaucrat, etc., to understand the vitalness of our subsector of the accommodation industry across the fabric of this country. And, it was interesting last year, almost to the day, I remember having a little conversation with a minister saying, in 12 months we're going to have double the rate of homelessness in this regional town than that is across Australia. I was wrong. took 7 months. And the fact of the matter is, presently it's about education. Second to that, and aligned with that, is actually how we, as an industry, ensure that the fabric is not broken from unintended, uneducated, unevidenced decisions. That's on us, and that's what we're doing right now.
Thanks.
And then once we have that, then we can go forth.
Anyone else want to add to that industry, or no? Do you have any questions from the audience before we sort of wrap up? Yes, in the middle. We got a microphone? Radinka? Oh, sorry. Fazani, you've got a microphone? No? Hang on. We grab a microphone and you got one? Oh, they're all up on stage, sorry. That's all right. You got a big voice anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Fiona from Victoria's High Country. So I have a question specifically for Will in regards to the 7.5% levy that will be effective in Victoria on Airbnb or holiday home rentals, and how you plan on changing the way you rent. Will you be increasing prices? What's your sort of model around that, if you have one?
Yeah, just a bit of context. About 60 odd weeks ago, the Mayor of Melbourne came out with a weird policy decision on housing and rates, and putting caps and rates, further rates levied on the land as well as on the revenue of a guest. That sparked a Senate inquiry that myself and Expedia spoke at government, which they then imposed and made law a 7.5% increase, sorry, a 7.5% tax on the gross booking value of each booking in our sector. They also wanted to, and it's unfortunately potentially coming, a 2% tax on all other accommodation styles across, be it hotels, be it motels, be it caravan parks, etc. Where your question is exactly going is interesting, because it is still not true, and the backbenchers and the shadows are still not agreed on the policy text of that. But it looks like Mornington Peninsula and 4 other peninsulas and council areas will withdraw all of their 15 and 17% tax ratios on top of the land tax within the councils, and remove all council restrictions, which then will allow, they think, the 7.5% tax to be imposed on January 1st. There's going to be some carve-outs. What are the carve-outs? Carve-outs are on, presently our industry supports about, of the 1% I was talking about earlier in residential, there's about 0.2% of that goes to domestic violence, housing families. There's the other 30-odd% of the construction workers, they'll be all carved out, it appears, at this moment on tax. We're looking for that. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to stop to 7.5%. I think there will be a review called in about 2.5 years that will relook at what that does mean to regional economies in Victoria, what it means to jobs, and what does it actually mean to affordability, which we see, especially in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, what's happened in New York, what's happened in Florence. There's no effect. It actually pushes other prices up. So we're not going to what's the end? 7.5% is coming. There'll be carve-outs. There'll be review in 2.5 years. Then it's back to us to go back again. To the wider industry, be careful. Treasury in this state is looking at the old bed tax. I'm walking the corridors because of what's happening. And there's a review coming in Queensland after the next election. So we just need to be very careful. Every bloody state is in debt, and they're looking at us as to help solve some of that debt. Not all, but some.
Thank you, Will.
Sorry,
One more question. Anyone else? All right, to close up, Matt, what is the burning issue that keeps you up at night?
It depends which night of the week it is, I suspect. I think with our industry, it's probably around skills and labour and the policies that are happening behind the scenes, and the fact our industry needs to speak with one voice. I think if we go to the government with 20 things to ask for, we'll get nothing. We need to be very concise and ensure that we are ensuring our our future is strong from a taxation perspective and also from a labour perspective.
Sean.
From my perspective, I think given the, again, strength of trade we've had in the last couple of years, for me, I think the biggest question in my mind is how do we make the most to capitalise on that opportunity and not let it slip through our fingers. We've had, as I mentioned, a really significant captive market for 2 or 3 years coming out of COVID, and now we're moving into a vastly more competitive market, and also in the context of, you know, a more challenging economic environment as well. So for me, it's, you know, are we doing enough to elevate the guest experience to remain, you know, I guess, sustainable in the growth that we've had over the last few years?
Gavin.
I was probably trying to find somewhere to watch the All Blacks at 3 o'clock in the morning somewhere. But my biggest thing that keeps me awake at night is this attitude from top to bottom. And this is where COVID's had a big impact. And I try and communicate, I try and educate, and I try and motivate. But it's a whole new environment, and it's just people.
Yeah. The younger people are very different than when we were brought up, when my era. Rod.
Development. I think the changing models that we're going through, particularly with us being a brand, franchise, manchise, you know, HMAs, where do they fit? It's very busy in that profitability line. With the third-party management companies and things that are in there. And I think trying to work out where we best fit in that franchise model or that manchise or HMA model is what keeps me awake, yeah, for sure.
Will, I know what keeps you up at night, the governments, but besides,
That's an education.
Yeah.
You know, I'm different sort of tech, to be honest. As we all know, we all probably going to live 4,000 weeks. I've got 1,400 left. And please God, I can drive some value. So spend time, more time, quality time with myself, my family, and with my teams, and they're with me so we can leave some legacy. And everything else will look after itself.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was an amazing panel. Please put your hands together. That was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.